This is, well, I'm not certain actually how many times Judith has spoken to us, but I have on record 4. She has had 3 careers, first as a travel agent, then as a music agent, and now as God's agent. She has been in sales her entire life. Judith was born and raised in Vancouver, but moved to Toronto more years ago than she will admit to. A graduate of U of T in 1990, majoring in political science, and in 2003 from Wycliffe College Seminary with a master's degree in divinity. Judith was ordained as deacon and priest in the Anglican Church in the same year. She was in parish ministry for the next 9 years as both curate of St. Andrew's Scarborough for 2 years and incumbent of the Church of the Holy Spirit in Mississauga for 7 years. Judith left parish ministry in 2012 with no fixed plans, but within 4 months she found herself at the Mission to Seafarers, and 6 months later was appointed interim executive director during the process of amalgamation with the Hamilton Mission to Seafarers. In January 2014, she was appointed executive director of the newly amalgamated Mission to Seafarers Southern Ontario. In June 2017, that new mission expanded with the opening of the Terry Finlay Seafarers Center in Oshawa, named for the former liaison bishop. In October 2019, Judith was appointed regional director of the newly incorporated Mission to Seafarers Canada, which includes stations in Vancouver, Thunder Bay, Sarnia, Lake St. Clair, Windsor, Hamilton, Toronto, Oshawa, St. John, and Halifax. The organization is in the planning stages to open a seafarers welfare and research station in St. John's, Newfoundland in 2023. The granddaughter of a master mariner in the merchant service, Judith is an honorary member of the Great Lakes Division of the Master Mariners Association and sits on the board of directors for the Marine Club as chaplain. Although she retired from her position as executive director of the Mission to Seafarers Southern Ontario in December 2021, she returns as a board member this month. In her not abundant spare time, Judith enjoys photography, making jewelry, reading real books with pages, music, theater, and films, and traveling, especially when it involves places of historical interest. However, it is her work with the Mission to Seafarers that has been the highlight of all 3 careers. Never a job, always a joy. And of course, she's also the chaplain of Shellbacks. I don't know when you find time to breathe, Judith. You are so busy. Please give Judith a warm Shellback welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Skipper. I think this is my 4th time of speaking to you. In any event, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm speaking today from the perspective of Mission to Seafarers Canada. So it's just sort of a little expanded version. Now, Ron, shall I?
Yes.
Okay. So, nope. There we are. Okay, can everybody see that?
We don't see it yet.
Okay. What do I?
You share screen, then choose it. Here we go.
Okay, hang on.
Oh.
All right, we'll just wait for a second. Can we now see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Are you still there?
We should, could we mute Diane?
Yes.
So we don't horn in on a private conversation. Okay. Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here again today. I am the regional director for Mission to Seafarers Canada. There are 9, actually 8 current regions around the world. Canada, the US used to be a region, but there are now only 2 stations left. So Seattle and Baltimore, the two Mission to Seafarers American stations, are actually associate members of our mission in Canada, and the potential looms for a North American region, as we have a contiguous border and we have nobody shooting at us from either side of the border. And we also all speak the same language virtually. When I look at some of the other regions like Asia, where there's South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Myanmar, that's one region. And all the different languages they speak there, it kind of makes sense that we might want to be together in North America. However, at the moment, we are Mission to Seafarers Canada with American associates. The 9 regions around the world are Asia, Middle East and South Asia, which includes India, South Africa, which includes the entire continent. Middle East and South Asia is also administered from Cyprus, Europe and the UK, Australia, which includes Borneo, and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, and finally Central and South America, which also includes the Caribbean. So the world got divided up about 9 years ago into regions. The Mission to Seafarers' new Secretary General decided to take a little trip around the world and, you know, investigate some of these places that nobody had been to for many, many years, and discovered about 50 missions that were receiving support from our international headquarters that had nothing to do any longer with the mission. One place was a bar, and who says sailors don't like bars, right? But in any event, that was not the purpose of the funds going to this particular place. And another place set up a bus company for the little town they were in with the funds that the mission was sending to them. Needless to say that those particular stations were somewhat crushed when they had their funding removed, most particularly because they had nothing to do with seafaring, weren't even near the port any longer, because some of the countries had changed the positioning of the port vis-a-vis the seafarers. So long story short, we have approximately 200 stations in 120 countries around the world. We are the largest seafarer welfare company in the world, probably followed by the Stella Maris, which is the Roman Catholic version of the Mission to Seafarers. Most countries, the Stella Maris shares the premises with the Mission to Seafarers, or as we call it, ecumenism is the Mission to Seafarers. The Anglican Church builds and maintains the mission station, and everybody else just joins us. So they come in and use our premises, but that's another story. In any event, we are still very active since our incorporation in 1856, but we were actually started in 1837 in Bristol Harbor. This is a bike shirt that's being worn by one of the folks who took part in the Vancouver fundraising bike ride. Every year they do a variety of different routes, and it starts at the mission and it ends at the mission. It goes all over the Lower Mainland. It can be quite strenuous, and I would certainly not be one of those people attempting it. But this is the only fundraising effort that has been maintained through the whole of COVID, because it's outdoors and nobody needs to be near each other. So that's the one that Vancouver has been keeping up for quite a while now. COVID changed all our lives in so many different ways. It didn't just change our lives and keep us inside our homes. For seafarers welfare workers, we didn't stay inside. We kept working. We never stopped working. We went to visit the ships, but as far in as we were able to get to the ship was the bottom of the gangway. This particular ship is in Oshawa, which is now owned by Hamilton, the Port of Hamilton, and is officially part of the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority. This particular person underneath the hard hat and behind the mask on the right is Captain Kirsty. She's the first woman captain I have met, and she's from Aberdeen, Scotland. This ship she's been on board as a captain for at least a decade, and the same crew signs up for her ship every single time, every year. They love her. She runs a very, very tight ship, as they say, and someday, Skipper, you can explain what that means to me. And she's very popular, but she's got a really well-run ship. We were bringing Christmas gifts on board a couple of years ago, and it happened to be Kirsty's ship that was in. On the right side picture is a photograph of Jill Wiley, who's one of our volunteers in Oshawa. She is probably one of the oldest volunteers in the entire system and was voted Volunteer of the Year 2 years ago by the International Sailor Society of Canada. These folks are in our Halifax mission, which has been around for a very long time. On the photo on the right, they're playing pool, as you can see, and on the left, they are standing. The woman in the on the far left is Helen Glenn. She's the station manager. We don't currently have an actual chaplain. A lot of volunteers left many of the mission stations in 2020 because of COVID, but not really in Halifax. Halifax, they still have a complement of about 25 volunteers. Our volunteers in Oshawa, for example, went from 18 to 2. So some places lost, some places gained. Hamilton, we started getting more volunteers. Vancouver lost a lot of volunteers. Most of the work now falls to the 4 chaplains who are there, and it's a slog. It's a slog. Halifax is known for doing outstanding work, and they provide a lot of hospitality. These photographs were taken in the last 3 months. And this is our packing day in Hamilton. Oh, right in the middle, in the front, in the very middle is my dear dad. Used to love coming to packing day. We in Southern Ontario donate around 800 bags for Christmas. That has not changed with COVID. That, in fact, grew. And Halifax, for example, gives 1,500 bags, and they do about the same in Vancouver. Not quite so many in Thunder Bay, the rest of the Great Lakes. Our stations, Southern Ontario, it's 800 in total. And St. John gives around 500 or 600, I believe. Montreal, we don't have a station in Montreal, but they do around 1,500. So the seafarers that come into the lakes are very, very well taken care of. But we have 3 serious issues in the lakes and in fact across Canada. The most important one is shore leave. That's the current big issue. Vaccinations is the second, and shore leave and vaccinations impact on the third issue, which is personal shopping. But here you can see we have a team of people. We can pack up 800 bags in that station in about 4 hours, which is pretty amazing. So personal shopping. Starting in 2020, when they could not get off the ships, in March, as a matter of fact, lockdown happened coincident with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway. We kind of went into overdrive in all the stations across Canada. And overdrive meant doing personal shopping for seafarers. And that has a wide-ranging effect. We were working maybe 20 hours a day, all of us. Volunteers were out there driving around picking up items. We were trying to do as much pre-ordering as we could. Seafarers were sending us emails. It was kind of crazy. Every time we would deliver something to a ship, they would come at us with more lists of what they needed. And just before we all started tearing our hair out, a bunch of the seafarer welfare workers, actually in Canada, the United States, and Europe, were brought together by one of our colleagues, Jason Zeidma, who is the executive director of both the North American Maritime Ministry Association and Secretary General for the International Christian Maritime Association, which is all the world of seafarer welfare workers, brought us all together. And we talked about how are we dealing with shopping, because it was literally driving us crazy. You can see over $1.5 million in Canada alone of items purchased by Mission to Seafarers on behalf of seafarers. That's $1.5 million spread out on our personal credit cards, because until recently, seafarers did not have either credit cards or debit cards to prepay their items. And I can tell you, we lost no money on these transactions, zero. The seafarers paid up for everything. Sometimes it was a little fraught, shall I say. Some countries think the price of an item means that's the starting point for a bargain. So you bargain with us. And we would have to explain to them, no, that was the price they had to pay. And they knew they had to pay this, but it would involve 10, 15, 20 minutes of fighting over what the price was. It was kind of hysterical. So we decided and arranged around the world how we were going to deal with this. One ship, one list. So they would have an email address, a central email address, to email us the list for the ship prior to their arrival at the particular port they were coming into. And we're even setting it up further to have an app which will allow them to go onto each station and download these lists. And this app will be monitored locally, but it provides the same thing. We get one ship, one app with a list of what everybody wants, what the total prices are. And of course, some of our problems are in Canada. They go onto the .com website for things like Walmart and Dollarama and look at the price, which are all in American. And of course, it's different. So we have to teach them how to go on the .ca website so that they get the proper prices for things. We do one order, we pre-order everything, we purchase everything, we bring it to the ship on arrival. It's all in individual bags per person, depending on the order. They come down, they bring us their money, we hand them over their goods and chattels. Some of the items that are ordered are cases of Doritos and Frito-Lay's Lay potato chips ketchup, Pringles, cases of specific different kinds of chocolate bars. They like O. Henry's. They also like very good chocolate like Lindt. All kinds of personal items for their girlfriends and wives and daughters, makeup, underwear, bras. It's really hysterical. They also like photographs of the Victoria's Secret models. When they can go shopping themselves, they like having pictures of themselves in front of the pictures of the Victoria's Secret models. So it's quite diverse. Exercise equipment, iPhones, laptops and computers, all kinds of things like this. So it's really, truly remarkable. And we have been, as you can see, $1.5 million. One of my chaplains alone had $80,000 on his personal credit card, which is all shopping from seafarers. I don't think he's had to buy groceries for 2 years because of the points that he has earned. Anybody have any questions so far? All right. Container dock in Vancouver Harbor was built a number of years ago. I found an old postcard from Vancouver that was an aerial shot of the city, and this is not on it. It was built in the last 25 years to enable the cargo ships, the container ships rather, to come into Vancouver Harbor and discharge their cargo. This is a picture I took a couple of years ago, and you can see there's all kinds of cargo in this area, but there are no ships, because where are the ships? There are the ships. And again, this was last summer that I took this photograph. This year, we went, we had our annual conference for Mission to Seafarers, and went into the Vancouver Fraser Valley headquarters for the harbor, and there were dozens of TV screens around the room and maps of where things were. And every one of these ships is mapped according to where they are. And sometimes it can take up to 8 weeks to get to the container port and discharge their cargo, which means these guys sit on their ship for 8 weeks. They cannot get off. They can look at the scenery, but they can't actually visit it. There's no way for them to leave their ships. Consequently, there's no way for us to get to their ships. They're trying to enable a launch ministry, which will take our chaplains out to the ships, but they have to climb the pilot ladder, which is quite dangerous. So they're kind of reluctant to do that. And I'm not sure that our insurance covers that, because there's a huge risk in them doing that. So the ships literally cover English Bay 12 months of the year. The other side of this problem is that these fellows and women are sitting on these ships and have been on board for, now, a contract is 9 to 11 months. Some of these folks have been on board for 15, 17, 19 months. And then you pull them into a harbor where they may be told they are going home, they're being repatriated, and they have another 8 weeks to wait just to get off the ship. The view is really pretty, but you can get sick of that view if you have no idea when you're being allowed off. The seafarers feel like they are in prison, with several exceptions. The prison doesn't move up and down. They can get outside of the prison and walk on grass. They get 3 meals a day, guaranteed. And they're allowed movement of their person, and they can get Wi-Fi, which they can't always get on board a ship, to communicate with their families. So prison, they think, would be a better option. Of course, we know it's not, but that's how they feel. In actually, what is today? The 16th? Today is the 16th of November. 2 years ago today, the National Seafarers Welfare Board was founded in Canada. A little history. The Maritime Labor Convention 2006 was legislation the IMO developed that they want as many countries in the world as possible to sign on to, which details what human rights seafarers specifically are allowed. And every country that signs onto this legislation is required, therefore, in their own law. This law becomes encased in Canadian law or whatever country signs on, so that we are required to see that this legislation is respected. Shore leave is one of the key components of this. Also, the length of a contract. COVID washed all that away. COVID just wiped that out. Canada was one of the first signatories in the first 6 months that this legislation was finally passed, and we signed it on in 2012. The Americans have never signed it. They have not signed onto this legislation. Most of Europe has, Australia, New Zealand, but not the United States. So for 2 years since we were actually founded, the Seafarers Welfare Board includes all the seafarer welfare workers in Canada, or our organizations. I represent the Mission to Seafarers. It includes the shipping federations. It includes Transport Canada, who initially founded it, Elizabeth Bertrand. It includes the Association of Canadian Port Authorities. It includes the unions, the SIU, the ITF, and others. It includes anybody in Canada that has a connection to the maritime industry. We just had our first in-person conference last week in Ottawa, and it was a huge success. We were shocked at how many Transport Canada people came to our working group, and the amount of attention that we got for the work that we do. Most shipping companies, as I say here, denied shore leave to seafarers, citing continuing concerns over COVID, which for the most part are no longer legitimate because we have vaccines, and most countries have access to vaccines. And seafarers from foreign countries are allowed to have access in Canada for vaccines. I'll talk about that in a moment. And we continue to have to work with shipping companies, with seafarer, with masters, ship masters, and with CBSA, Canada Border and Security, who don't come to our meetings anymore, by the way, and other groups to ensure that the Transport Canada ship safety bulletins, which give specific details about what is allowed and what is not allowed in Canada, specifically regarding shore leave. Currently, shore leave is allowed for every single seafarer coming to Canada, domestic or foreign, 6 hours every day. Some seafarers, some masters have told us that they can't allow shore leave because if somebody catches COVID and brings it on board, they are personally financially liable to replace that seafarer. Now, they've never detailed to us exactly what that means. We're thinking, do they have to pay for the new people to come in, which is certainly not the case. But that's the excuse they're being used. So we've had a lot of issue around this, but now because we bring the ship safety bulletins on board and say, you have to give them shore leave. Can you imagine when you were working in an office building, somebody shutting the front door of the office building and telling you couldn't get out because somebody might catch a cold and bring that cold back into the building. And so you couldn't go anywhere. Your families couldn't come and pick you up and take you away. Even if you promised not to go anywhere, you couldn't. You had to stay in the building 4 months at a time. That is the closest I can come to telling you how these folks feel. When they get off ship, we have seen all kinds of strange behaviors, from kissing the dock, hugging us, crying. It has been a nightmare for the last 3 years for a lot of seafarers. And we just continue to advocate for them and try to give them as much support as possible. And shopping becomes the biggest part of our support, if you can possibly believe it. Bringing ashore bringing on board cartons of chips and chocolates is kind of strange. But when you've been stuck on board your ship for months and months and months at a time, that's what you do. The most rewarding part of the National Seafarers Welfare Board is the fact that we, as a group of seafarer welfare workers, both collectively and our individual companies, have gained legitimacy. Nobody knew what we did. Now, as many times as I have come to speak at the Shellbacks, you're not a very big group in terms of the wider number of people in the country who have any kind of interaction with ships or seafaring at all. And even people in the industry had absolutely no clue who we were or what we did. So we invited a lot of them to come to our conference in Vancouver and talk to us and tell us about what they did in relationship with the seafarer community. And then they stayed to find out what we did in relationship to the seafaring community and how our jobs interacted with each other. And that is why so many of them ended up in Ottawa. Same group that came to Vancouver came to Ottawa for the CMAC meeting, Canadian Maritime Advisory Council meeting for Transport Canada. And we have now legitimacy with Transport Canada, with the unions, with the shipping federations, with the port authorities. It is astonishing how that has changed our landscape. And we are hopeful. Another part of the legislation is MLC 2006, is that countries who sign on are required then to financially support seafarers welfare organizations. So that's our next big hurdle, is to actually get onto the government get into Transport Canada and become a part of their annual budget, and that we will get some kind of financial stability in our organizations. As you know, we are self-supporting. We are not a government organization, and we rely on donations and a limited number of grants which are available to us. But that is not stable, and it's not guaranteed. It's very, very difficult for us. So we are hopeful that these two things that have happened now will open the door for Transport Canada. And there are Transport Canada folks on our board to start making the case for us to get government support. I could add that in New Zealand, Germany, Italy, France, Holland, Denmark, their governments support seafarer welfare organizations to the tune of millions and millions and millions of their dollars. Australia is about to also leap into that one. They are a signator. And we are hoping that Canada will follow soon, because we made the case very clearly at the conferences that this is essential to our being able to continue to work. It's very, very difficult to work in that kind of environment when your funding is not stable at all. Vaccines. One of the most significant things that we did in the last 2 years since vaccines became available en masse in 2021 was to make the case with the public health authorities of Canada and the individual public health authorities in each province, each maritime province, that seafarers needed to be vaccinated. First of all, to get off the ship, to protect them from each other, and to protect us from them and them from us. But that this was essential. They needed vaccinations. We formed a vaccine working group for the National Seafarers Welfare Board the same week they declared that the vaccines were going to be available, so that we could try to get ahead of the game. There are 34 public health units in Ontario alone, and they don't talk to each other. All due respect to anybody who may be listening who worked for public health in Ontario. They don't talk to each other. And the Southern Ontario area where our stations are, Oshawa, Toronto, Hamilton, Port Colborne, Port Weller, that's 6 different health units, public health units, and they don't talk to each other. So as hard as we work to try to get information from them and to coordinate our efforts and to make a national strategy or even a provincial strategy, it was impossible to do that. And we were left floundering. Every ship that came in, can you get us vaccinated? Are there vaccines available? Of course, they all wanted J&J, which was a one shot, but the Canadian government hadn't approved J&J. So we had Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca available, and they didn't want that because they didn't know when they were coming back and when they could be guaranteed getting their next shot, and whether it would be Pfizer or Moderna, AstraZeneca. It was, you know, it was just a nightmare. It was a hair pulling out exercise. So we weren't completely stymied, but we were sort of daunted but undaunted at the same time. In British Columbia, you had to have the equivalent of an OHIP number, which of course these poor characters don't have OHIP numbers. They found a way to create sort of a fake medical ID, and our folks were driving seafarers all around the province of British Columbia, and sometimes quite great distances away from the port, to get a vaccine at a clinic that would accept them. This could be in Coquitlam, this could be in Mission. There are quite some distances that folks were driving. One of my colleagues was driving a group of seafarers around when one of them announced to her that he'd tested positive, and she had to turn the whole group back and take them to their ship. It was devastating for them. I don't know how he got in the bus and not, made that announcement ahead of time, but in any event, in Hamilton, there was a group of folks, and this lady here and this lady here are part of that group. And they were walking around Hamilton downtown, vaccinating homeless people. Homeless people don't make appointments. They may all have cell phones, but they don't make appointments. So our wonderful doctor, Carrie, and Dr. Joe were walking around downtown, and they were walking up to homeless people saying, hey, you know, how'd you like a jab? And they were saying, okay. And that was it. We called them. How would you feel, we asked them, about coming on board some ships with us and getting our seafarers vaccinated? What a great idea, they said, and climbed the gangway with their equipment. And Carrie had worked out how to get a fake ID number and put it in her computer. And Michelle was giving out the vaccines, and they were thrilled to bits. This was a post-vaccination clinic. The captain, this is the captain, wanted everybody to have their picture taken. And this is the clinic day on board. He said, well, they're taking pictures of each other. They were over the moon. I cannot stress enough how incredibly important this was to them. Some of these folks weren't allowed to go back into their home countries without a second vaccine, for example, and yet they hadn't had either vaccine in their home country because the home country wasn't going to give it to them. So they were counting on getting their vaccinations in other countries like Canada. The vaccination meant that they could go home. Former Transport Minister Mark Garneau spoke at the United Nations shortly after the pandemic was announced and said that Canada would be a green lane for anybody that wanted, in the seafaring community, in the maritime community, to be repatriated, sent back to their home country, or to be transferred in as replacement crew for those who were being repatriated. Now, that was tough to do because so many airlines simply stopped flying, as you all know. But he said we would be a green lane. And so how was that going to happen? Well, our team at Transport Canada, and then subsequent to that, the National Seafarers Welfare Board, we would get calls saying, okay, we have 9 guys trying to get back to Myanmar. Let's put our heads together. And how are we going to make that happen? Yes, they've all been vaccinated. Yes, they've had a booster shot. Who's flying to where? And everybody would chip in and try to get folks back home. It took 2 weeks to get this particular group of Myanmar seafarers back to Myanmar because they had to travel such a circuitous route, finding an airline that would fly them there, wait times in different countries. Foreign Affairs had to intervene at one point because Korea said, no, they can't stay and wait for 3 days, but the flight schedules didn't match up. And so they had no choice. So there was a lot of things going on. All came down to Canada being a green lane and getting their vaccine before they went home. It was incredible. We could not have done this without the National Seafarers Welfare Board. The things that they that group opened up for us, and the access to things like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Immigration, Transport Canada, PHAC, all of these different groups that had to sort of collectively help us. They did. They helped us. And it was a phenomenal effort. One day, 15 seafarers all got vaccinated, sending photos home to their families. Unbelievable. Later on, we were able in Toronto, the clinic down at the convention center opened a green lane up for us. And all we had to do was bring the foreign seafarers there. These are 2 Ukrainian seafarers, the before and the after picture, sorry, the before and the after photographs. We were able to get, they were told they were going to get their QR codes in 4 to 6 weeks. We had them before we left the parking lot that day. They're sitting in the back seat of my van and saying, Judith, we just got our QR codes. We can go home now. I mean, it was phenomenal. The excitement and the joy that this brought to them and the relief it brought to them. They were very proudly wearing, I've had my vaccination badges. And we took a lot of people to the public health clinics wherever we could in every particular city where we have a mission. And this is the medical clinic in Halifax. Halifax or St. John, I can't remember. I think it might be Halifax. And they, yes, it is Halifax. And they got their vaccinations all at a local clinic. Every day the situation changed. Every single day we had to call around and see where we were going. Was there going to be a clinic in the parking lot that day? Was there going to be a clinic in the warehouse? Was there going to be a nearby clinic we could drive people to? It took hundreds of human hours to do all this. Our people did it. No questions. Load them up in the van and take them where they needed to go. The total number of seafarers who have been vaccinated in Canada as of last week stood at over 7,500, and it is higher than that now. Montreal alone did 1,200 in the first few weeks. Montreal, Halifax, and Vancouver are the largest groups. I think Halifax had vaccinated over 3,000 people, which is absolutely remarkable, just extraordinary. And this is basically what we've just talked about. As I said, it's an incredibly complicated process. One day, Shoppers Drug Mart near the port will allow them to have vaccinations, and then the next day, the person who's on duty won't allow them. It depends on who's in the shop that day. And it's not that they're not able to do this. It's just that they don't like doing it because it takes a little more work. That's why people like Dr. Carey and Dr. Joe are so important, because they go right on board the ship and they don't have those problems. There's a similar group in Vancouver that are going on board the ships with vaccines and vaccinating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. But again, it's a Seafarers welfare organization. Without them, we wouldn't have had anybody vaccinated. It just isn't possible to get that kind of work done. And we were getting support from all the different provinces. If somebody found out an idea that worked, we'd share the idea. It was just an amazing time for us, just an incredible time. St. John's, Newfoundland, National Seafarers Welfare Board did a gap analysis to find out how many terminals there are in the country and where there is no seafarer welfare service available. St. John's is the largest port in Canada and doesn't have a seafarers mission. So we were contacted a year ago, practically to the day, by a woman who works for the Marine Institute. She's a professor at the Marine Institute. And she said, you know, we have this gorgeous harbor and we have seafarers and we have a Marine Institute and we have no mission. Can you help us? So I finally was able to make a trip down in June to meet with her, Heather Carnahan, and the rest of the team at the Marine Institute and the people at the Faculty of Medicine at Memorial University. And we are in the process of putting together whatever there's applications for funding, and the team is in place to open a mission to seafarers, seafarer welfare / seafarer research center. One of the biggest issues, as you can imagine, learning about vaccines, learning about shore leave, learning about Wi-Fi and the lack of it and communication, is mental health. Mental health issues in the last 3 years for seafarers have exploded. Suicide is the largest problem, not COVID. Suicide is a far greater problem for seafarers. And so with no support system in St. John's, and this is a 12 months of the year station. And there's lots of issues that have happened even this year, which we got involved with, but we didn't have somebody, like I wasn't on the ground there. There isn't a station on the ground. So we know how important it is to get this station going. We also looked at places like Conception Bay and Petty Harbor, which is a fishing village. In India and in the Philippines, Mission to Seafarers has something called Family Welfare Services. Because so many seafarers leave the Philippines They don't really need admission to Seafarers when they come home, because they come home and they go to their house. The families who are left behind need help. They need people to come to go to when something happens to their seafarer family member, when something happens ashore that they need help with. And certainly places like Newfoundland, where there are fishing disasters that sadly happen all too frequently, and disasters on board the offshore oil rigs. And that's where Conception Bay comes in, because some of these folks come ashore at Conception Bay. Where do they go for help? So our approach in St. John's is not going to be specifically seafarers welfare alone, but to have an expanded number of services available to seafarers and their families, and especially in terms of researching how we can further help with mental health issues. The Seafarers International Union is extremely interested in supporting our efforts there, because that they have cited as one of the biggest problems that they're dealing with now is seafarers welfare. We hope our plan is to open this in 2023. Unfortunately, Heather Carnahan, who was the impetus for our group coming together, which was supported by the National Seafarers Welfare Board, Heather died in September this year. She was in her 40s. She leaves her 3 university-aged children behind, and the center will be named in her honor, because she was the person who brought us together. She was the person who said, why aren't we doing this? And she was an extraordinary support for us. We miss her every minute of the day. Heather took me to the Fisheries and Marine Institute in St. John. This is their lifeboat and helicopter rescue. They dropped this lifeboat into the water with people inside, and you have so many minutes to get out, after which you will die. Of course, you don't, they will pull you out of the water. But this is one of the Institute's training facilities for rescue. And certainly seafarers find themselves in these situations in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic off the coast of St. John's too many times. And again, St. John's Harbor, a beautiful, gorgeous, sunny morning can turn into a what the heck happened to the harbor, and it's full of fog instantaneously. It's a very unique place, and it can be a very dangerous place. This is a Coast Guard ship. This is the Vancouver Mission to Seafarers. This station is an historical building in Vancouver. It has historic status. It has been around since about 1913. My great uncles would have hung out here. They were seafarers. My grandfather certainly spent time here. We actually had my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary party in here. I went downstairs and it was like deja vu. The kitchen has virtually not changed in the last 40 years. And this is the team with the bikes waiting to go out on their fundraising exercise. Of course, fundraising again came to a shuddering halt in 2020, and we're only just starting to get back. Vancouver did their bike ride every year, maybe not as many people, but they certainly did their bike ride every year, as you can see. And we all work hard at our fundraising efforts to do the best that we can to raise funds and stabilize our funding, but that is the most difficult part. Helen Glenn, our station manager in Halifax, has done yeoman service in the last 3 years as station manager. She has been totally without a chaplain and has sort of stepped in to do that. She maintains contact with every single captain of every single ship that has come into the harbor and anyone that's on its way. She just has this long list of the captains. The Lieutenant Governor himself nominated Helen for a Queen's Platinum Jubilee Award, and she was notified days before the Queen died that she was the recipient. And this is the week that she is inducted and receives the actual award. So we're very, very excited, because when she got that award, it also elevated the knowledge and the status of the missions around Canada, and especially around Nova Scotia. People know who we are and what we do. And what we do is extraordinarily important. And Helen is one of the extraordinary people we have doing this work. Helen is not a chaplain. Helen is a layperson. She's an administrator, an office manager, and the station manager. But if they need her to deliver stuff to a ship, if she needs to listen to a seafarer, if she needs to help by calling somebody at home, she needs to get a body repatriated from the ship to shore and then shipped home to the person's home country. Helen is doing all of that by herself. She has a team of volunteers to support her in some things, but the major things come from Helen. So I wanted you to see a picture of Helen from Halifax. We're extremely proud of her. She is extraordinary. And nearing the end now, this house was built for the welfare of seamen by the gifts of many friends, inspired and united by the Christian work of Wilfred T. Grenfell, missionary on the coasts of Newfoundland and Labrador. This building is now a condo in the harbor, St. John's Harbor. It's 2 doors away from the hotel I actually stayed in, and I found this on the wall outside. There used to be a mission for seamen in St. John's. I don't know when, there's no dates on this. I don't know when it started or stopped. Look up Wilfred Grenfell. He was an Anglican missionary in Newfoundland and Labrador and toured around a lot. But this particular building right inside the harbor is overlooking the harbor, was there for years. And so we have a history to live up to. And we are looking forward to getting back to Newfoundland, finding the space, opening it up, and being able to welcome seafarers from the commercial ships, from the Coast Guard, from the Navy, from the fishing vessels, from the cruise ships. Whoever wants to come will be welcome. And that is our goal. We've already got people on the ground waiting, and we just need the location to get to. And the funding, again, that is extremely important. Unfortunately, at this moment, there is nothing available for us, or so we are told, unless we are willing to pay a substantial amount of money in rent. Nobody in the mission anywhere in Canada pays to rent their space beyond the cost of the utilities that we use. So we're talking anywhere from $1 a month or $1 a year to $350 a month, which is what we pay in Hamilton. So we're hoping we can find somebody with gracious and deep pockets to help us. So thank you. This is a picture of our team in Vancouver. Helen and I are in the front. Our liaison, Bishop David Edwards from Fredericton, New Brunswick, and some of our other group, Vancouver, Hamilton, our COO from London, Thunder Bay, and this is the Bishop of Vancouver, Bishop of New Westminster, and a couple of people from the church. Anything you give us goes to support the mission, which supports the Home Away from Home. We are the only people they get free Wi-Fi from. If they've got Wi-Fi on their ships, it's not always free. We have trained staff for seafarer support, from everything with technical SIM cards to mental health counseling and assistance overseas. We had several issues where seafarers died at sea, and we became involved in repatriating the remains to their home countries. Volunteer support. We always welcome volunteers as drivers, shoppers, mission hosts, and there are many, many more things that we do for our mission. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Skipper, for giving me this opportunity again to speak to Shellbacks. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. No. Okay. Judith, thank you so much. I would like to open the floor now to any questions or comments from anybody here. I know we normally go to raise your hand, but since we are a small group, Well, here we are. So if you want to raise your hand, you can.
If you want to wave your hand, I'll see you as well.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Ron. No comments or questions?
I'll start with one and ask Judith, the Toronto Port Authority, is it ever contemplated as to merge with Hamilton and so on? I mean, Hamilton is large and already spans the geography that Toronto is within.
The Hamilton Port Authority bought the Oshawa Port Authority at the request of Transport Canada, because the Oshawa Port Authority had gone bankrupt due to a couple of very bad decisions by their board. And so the Hamilton Port Authority bailed them out. And that is why they became, there was no merger offer. It was a buyout. But it enabled them to stay in business, and they have thrived under the new leadership, and they've done very well. Toronto doesn't have the same ethos about shipping that Hamilton and Oshawa does.
No.
They are, as you know, Ron, not interested in shipping.
No.
They're interested in condos, but they're not really interested in shipping, which is unfortunate because Toronto as a port is very busy. Rebar, cement, there's sugar, aggregate. These are the four big cargoes that come into the city. And if you look around Toronto in particular, I've stopped counting the number of cranes in the buildings around here, because there are, I think, over 250. There are more buildings being built in the city of Toronto than in the total of Chicago, Los Angeles, Montreal, and Vancouver put together.
Now, within the Port and Harbor of Toronto, now there's a lot more, or an increased number of cruise ships.
Yes.
Do the seafarers that you deal with ever come from cruise ships, or is it particularly just bulk freight or carriers?
They would if they could get off the ship. I have asked repeatedly for some space at the cruise ship terminal and been turned down. Again, I mean, we were evicted a year ago because they leased the building out to another movie studio, because the movie studio would use more of the vertical space in the building. So I can't get to the seafarers. Now, next year I will be at the terminal, sitting on a table outside. The other problem is they get very few hours to turn around in the port. So they have to strip all the beds, clean all the rooms, and then refix the rooms up. After that, they get, what, an hour off too? So I need to be right there. But yes, cruise ships are going to be, there's going to be more of them next year as well. So yeah, cruise ship companies are lousy employers. They're not good employers. So who have we got next? Julia, I think you had your hand up right away. Ron, did that answer your question, Ron?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Julia.
Yes, congratulations. That's an amazing work of just everything. The fact that I didn't know that all of the ports didn't have a site where they could get vaccinated. That's huge.
It is. It is.
The fact that Newfoundland, where that lovely tower is, doesn't have anything. No. I'm astonished. How much of this has been initiated by you to push from underneath to get all the government departments working together? I mean, I'm trying to still log on to one government department to pay them $12. I mean, well done.
Yeah, I had that problem last week trying to fill out my corporate annual return. It was $12. Me personally, no, I am part of a larger group. The National Seafarers Welfare Board is the impetus for this. Right. But what I can tell you is me personally went down to Newfoundland. I am the first and the only of the of any of the seafarer welfare corporations to have gone to Newfoundland with the specific purpose of meeting the teams, getting to know them. Thankfully, my classmate and friend is the dean of the cathedral, so I have access to personnel and to actually actively initiate getting the station in St. John's going. I'm going down again next year. If I have to do it in February in the middle of a storm, I will. But we've got to get this going, and especially in the winter. Last February, there was a Spanish trawler sank, and only 3 survivors of the 15 people on board. I was able to put a team on the ground together from because of Roger the Dean, and get some people to help the survivors. So that was my part. But because we have the support of the National Seafarers Welfare Board, there's a big team behind me doing this, and it will happen.
What about the doctors? Do you use the doctors that go all over the world, Doctors Without Borders?
No, that's a very specific group.
But that's what you need, is a seafaring doctors group.
We do. And if we could get doctors in clinics in the city, I'm on my 4th doctor in 2 years. So we can't, there's not enough doctors to see the patients here. But yeah, you're right. It would be lovely to get some Doctors Without Borders climbing the gangway.
And the mental health problem, my goodness.
But we have teams of people for doing that in St. John's. Okay. We're connected to the Faculty of Medicine at Memorial University, and the associate professor is on our team. So yeah,
so thank you.
That part is covered. That part is covered.
Amazing.
Thank you, Julia. Seamus, you're on mute, Seamus.
Oh, you're not anymore.
Not anymore.
I'm not anymore. Thank you, webmaster. I compliment you on your presentation, and
thank you.
I live not far, about 10 kilometers south of Pearson International Airport. And when I compared the problems that Canadians had going to Dominican Republic, Cuba, and then coming back and so forth, they're minuscule compared to what these unfortunate people had to put up with.
Thank you for making that comparison, Seamus. That's a really good one.
And it's very interesting. I didn't see, I'm not criticizing anyone, maybe I missed it, but I don't recall seeing any of this covered in the media. And why do I bring this up? Only the other day I was listening to a discussion about the importance of international shipping for our trade today. I forget what the percentage is, but I think it's
90. It's 90%. 90.
We were listening to the same thing.
Yes.
We rely not alone on the container ships, but on the crews. And it is unfortunate that due to the international, a ship may fly Panama or Liberia, and the crew are all Indonesian or Filipinos. But a lot of these people are really, it would appear, without any support. They're at the mercy of a whole lot of bureaucracies.
They are. They are indeed.
I'm very touched by the story of, you are correct, homeless people don't make appointments. And that's been a big issue, because, and I compliment Hamilton for handling that so well, but why not the sailors? And I never thought of that.
Yeah.
And last thing, I don't want to monopolize, I was very impressed to see that there's a woman ship's captain. I've never met one, because I went to school in Limerick in Ireland on the River Shannon, and sometimes when we didn't like a particular class, a buddy of mine and I, we would skip about half a mile down the road to the docks and watch the ships coming in from different nations, and they give us one of their cigarettes, which we weren't supposed to be smoking. But I had no idea growing up in Ireland that there was this big need for sailors I don't even know if we had a Seafarers thing in Limerick and Ireland. It's 40 miles from the sea, but it's tidal. Anyways, thank you for all the information, and I hope CBC and CTV and everybody else get a copy of this presentation for the research department, because they do research stories like this for the news.
They do. Actually, Seamus, I was interviewed in 2016 at the time of the Pan Am Games, I think it was 2016, that by CBC for a program called Tapestry. And
I know it.
Yeah. Yes, so I went on board. I took Jeff Good, who was the producer. He said, maybe we could do the interview at the mission. And I said, why don't we do it on board a ship? And he just about came out of his skin. And I took him on board a ship, and he met a captain, and the captain gave us lunch, and oh my gosh. And that particular interview, I hear, was also rebroadcast this summer. She's done it 3 times now. So it has been rebroadcast. And certainly supply chain issues came up because it was the seafarers that are the people who are keeping the ship moving, not the products themselves don't move the ship. The containers don't make the ship move. The ship moves because people do that. And when there's, Christmas time and issues with the supply chain is when you hear about seafarer issues, but you don't otherwise. And I wish it was more of an issue. I do my part. I write articles for people all the time, and, hope they get published. But anyways, thank you, Seamus, for your insights and your questions.
You're
Sally, is that you there?
you.
There you are.
Yes, hang on.
You're
I gotta
unmuted.
find where to.
You're unmuted.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yep. You're
Hello,
unmuted.
I hope. I believe the Newfoundland healthcare system is still being administered by the Grenville mission, and I'm blown away that the mission building is now a condo. When we were there in '97 with the Newfoundland flotilla, we had showers at the Mission of Seafarers, and they were still functioning. They had very few staff, but we were able to get a hot shower. So it was great. And the Grenville was, my father and my grandfather were those doctors. And Dr. Grenville was in a class between my dad and his dad, studying medicine in, I believe it was Trinity College, Dublin. And the Grenville Mission Society is still very big up in L'Anse Meadows, and it does, or St. Anthony in Labrador. And St. Anthony was where they were based, and they did all their medicine and Anglican preaching from Grand Banks trawlers. So I mean, it's
very interesting.
What blows me away is the title to that property should have been in the Anglican diocese, and they shouldn't have been able to sell it without the, who owns your church? You got to go right back to who donated the land, and was it donated to the parish or the diocese?
Now,
and I'm blown away that it's just now a big rich condo with no partnership to the mission.
Real estate, I discovered in Newfoundland when I was there, is a very different kind of thing than it is in Ontario, for example, where you have to title search and you have to go back however many years, generations, owners, blah, blah, blah. They don't do that in Newfoundland. It's kind of more like what they do in England, which is hope to God somebody buys what you're selling so that you can buy what you want. Which I've got friends in the process of going through this right now. I said, well, can't you just title search? And no, you don't do that. And I said the same thing in interview, you don't title search? No, they don't do that. So that is why a building like this just turned itself into a condo. Somebody paid somebody the money, and somebody took the money, and that was the end of it. It may not have been connected to the Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland, because our building in Toronto had no connection to the Diocese of Toronto. We were not in any way connected to the diocese.
Wow.
And
Sorry, excuse me.
another, the Grenville Mission still coordinates the outbound nursing. And I'm blown away that you had all the trouble with just getting vaccinations. Now, I know the healthcare system is one of the poorest in the countries and the doctors are the least well paid nationally. Noel, can you stop that? Sorry.
That's
Apologies
all right.
for the background.
Noel, listen to your wife.
Yeah.
I am listening.
He's busy embroidering.
Excellent.
So it blows me away that I know that the Catholic diocese in St. John's has a huge real estate because the way they interpreted their direction for staking out property, they send kids running with stakes, mallets, and in 4 directions. And that's why the Catholic diocese in Newfoundland is enormous acreage compared to Christchurch and the land around there. It's just, I think the ball's been dropped on a lot of levels, and I hope that somehow you can procure some funding through, backroom arm twisting. Sorry,
I'm still getting over RSV. I agree with you 100%. The Anglican Church, I've talked to 2 of the 3 bishops in Newfoundland. The Bishop of Western Newfoundland has no interest. The Central Newfoundland, who's in Gander, which isn't even on the coast, is the most interested. And the one in St. John's says, we've got no money, but I've got property. So don't worry about property. We can give you property, but we have to pay about $50,000 a year to rent the property.
Wow.
So it's very, very different. And just a little side note here on the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, in order to pay reparations for the residential schools, has instructed all their churches, all the parishioners have to buy the church buildings. So all the Catholic Church buildings, not the property, the buildings, are now owned by the parishioners who attend. And the cathedral, the basilica, which stands over St. John's Harbor, has been sold for some ridiculous amount of money, like $1.5 million, because that's what the parishioners could raise. So it's bizarre. It's all very bizarre. The mission to Seafarers is an Anglican mission, yes, where the Anglican Church connects itself to the mission. My only connection to the mission was the fact that I was appointed by the bishop. After that, they cut all ties with us. They had no connection to us whatsoever. Our connection is with the Diocese of Niagara, where Hamilton is. So,
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of layers.
When we were on the flotilla, Jez Hillier from a boat called Sea Therapy, which is in 2002, that flotilla to Newfoundland, his wife Jill was the administrator, volunteer administrator for the Grenville Mission at St. Anthony, and the hospital administrator, his good pal that crewed with them, his mother was Mrs. Grenville's housekeeper up in St. Anthony. And when they were retired, the Grenvilles were retiring and going back to England, because the northern Newfoundland is not a place for retirement if you are wealthy enough to have a choice in life. They re-emigrated back to England for retirement. And she said, I don't know what to give you as a retirement gift. And the lady looked and said, would you teach me how to read? Because they taught all kinds of children how to read in Sunday school, but her housekeeper didn't know how to read. And his last name was Power. And he said, my memory of my gran is she always was reading to us or had a book in her apron pocket. She loved the ability to be able to read. It was the greatest gift she could have been able to give her. So it's not that old a memory for Newfoundland.
No, exactly.
Wow. Judith.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally.
Yeah, and Judith, thank you. I have only one question, and that is there anything we as individuals can do to support what you're doing, other than donating money? I know that that's going to help, but writing letters, I mean, the fact that there's so little coordination from one place to another, and I know you're working hard to try and facilitate that. And
that's what Mission to Seafarers Canada is in the process of doing now.
Yes.
So that we're individually in our locations, but we are part of an umbrella group, so that national things, you know, we'll hopefully connect up with major corporations and things like this. But as I in our working group, I said, one of the most important things, groups of people, or one of the most important groups that do nothing to support seafarers and probably have no clue how involved these people are in the lives of their companies, are the end users, the Walmarts, the Dollaramas, the major grocery store chains, the major furniture chains, the major department stores. All their stuff gets here, 90% of it, on a ship. And so it's an awareness campaign that we need to undertake to make people aware of where their stuff comes from. All the coffee chains. We don't grow coffee in Ontario or anywhere in Canada for that matter. You know, there isn't a country called Starbucks. The coffee comes from all over the world. Go online and look at where Nespresso gets their coffees from. The Galapagos, Kenya, Indonesia, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Brazil, everywhere. So the awareness part, talk to people you know. If you know somebody who is a senior executive at one of these particular companies, tell me, let me know. I would love to connect up with them and make an appointment to, you know, meet them face to face and say, we need your help, because our seafarers bring you your products. You know, the biggest seafarer store they love going to is Walmart, because Walmart lays their stores out exactly the same way everywhere in the world. So, little story, a few years ago, we drop a group of seafarers off at Walmart. They go in, they've had a bonus. They've been given $100 each for this extra work they did. So they go to Walmart so they can buy chips and pop and chocolate. There are 3 go-to items that they love to have because they're going to have a little party. We call in advance and say, you know, these guys have American money. Is that okay? Oh yeah, no problem. Get a phone call saying the police have detained them at the Walmart because some nitwit cashier decided the money that they had was counterfeit and that they were spreading counterfeit money around. The police show up. So these 7 Filipino seafarers are surrounded by these burly Hamilton police cops, frightened out of their lives. They don't know what to do. Our chaplains show up. I'm in Toronto, so I had two or three people went immediately to the scene. One of the police officers takes the money and says, this isn't counterfeit. They were forced to give back everything, and they except the police officer took one of the $100 bills. Didn't note where it came from, didn't note the ship the guy was on, made no attempt to get it back to him at all. It was about a year and a half later, I get a phone call saying, I've got this $100. I sent a letter to the president of Walmart that morning, the next morning, to complain about this. I got a phone call about a week later from somebody who identified herself as customer service, and we got your letter and we're very upset and we're going to answer it. No, they haven't. So the word went around, we call that the crime of shopping while being Filipino, which can be a very serious crime in Walmart. That particular Walmart is now either closed or closing, but it is imminent. And the Filipino seafarers would say to us, we want to go to the good Walmart, not that one. And that went through the entire Filipino shipping community, which makes up 47.9% of 1.7 million seafarers in the world. So they knew, they told each other, we don't want to go there. Bloody Walmart can, you know, make some reparations to our seafarers, believe me, because 90% and more of their stuff comes from another country and gets here on a ship.
So the question is, I don't know how Walmarts are run, but do they have different managers who are responsible for that particular store, and that the oversight of the big bosses up above is not part of the management, as it were?
It is, though. It is. They told,
okay.
Yeah, they indicated to me, well, that they could never give out the name of a manager because it was against their security protocol. And so I contacted the president of the company, and he could care less. If I was the president of a company and somebody sent me that letter, I'd be all over that like a rash. Nothing got ignored. And it happened more than once.
Yeah, it gets ignored because it doesn't touch their bottom line enough.
And they never questioned the European seafarers.
So we have, again, prejudice,
yeah.
just as we do in who's talking here?
I don't hear who's speaking.
Okay, can I?
Sally, go ahead. But you're muted. Sally, you're muted.
Can I make a suggestion that you do a second request and follow up? And please don't think this doesn't affect your bottom line, because you're already closing that location.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been 6 years, Sally. I'm not sure if I want to do yet another follow-up. I followed up once, nothing happened. They don't care. They seriously do not care. They're Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I never go to Walmart.
Location.
Pardon?
A closing location. It's a very significant expense.
Yeah.
So it did impact their bottom line, and I would just be all over that like a rash too.
Unless they sold the property to a condo developer, which is, you know, likely. I don't know. I don't know what the issue was, but in 6 years, they've never contacted me, and I made 2 requests. So, you know, clearly it doesn't mean anything to them. But, and they made the decision to close that one. Yeah, they were running out of stock, and everybody was like, what is going on here? But I haven't set foot in that place since then, or pretty much any other Walmart for that matter, but that's another story. So
Sherry, did you have a?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah. Listening to this about Walmart is very interesting, because when they opened up in Ontario and Newmarket and places like that, I don't know. I want to support our stores, and I have only shopped one thing in all my life in Walmart, which was a special laundry machine, a laundry cover, because I was just so, it just abhorred me listening to so many stories about Walmart. And I have to admit, I haven't shopped there. I'd rather support our Canadian stores, truthfully. Of course, there's so many that are owned by other cities anyway. I mean, other countries. Look at the Bay, which is wonderful. It's a good department store. It's an American store, but the trouble is, wherever you go, there's so many that are just, so I live in a wonderful neighborhood. Diane knows she's the same neighborhood. And I really like, when I can, to support our stores in Toronto and Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, folks, it's 20 after 2, and we've had a long, wonderful discussion. And Judith, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your comments and your thoughts. Really fabulous. So if anybody knows a senior executive of a big company, tell me.
And we may be able to look at Canadian Tire. Dick Shibley has connections there, so I'll talk to him about that.
That'd be super. That's one of the big ones for sure.
And they do, I mean, they are Canadian, and they do have, they have a lot of philanthropy in their policies.
Yeah.
So thank you, Judith. That was amazing.
My pleasure.
You
always.
Yes, you have enlightened us even once again. And next week, we are going back to a Time Team special, The Boats That Made Britain. And so we have Tony Robinson joins a team of experts as they strive to reconstruct the Dover boat and so unlock the secrets of this mysterious time past in Britain. And then on the 30th, Gordon Lacko is returning for an interesting look at Lieutenant Henry Bayfield, Royal Navy, and the charting of the Upper Great Lakes.
Ooh.
Henry Wolseley Bayfield was an officer of the Royal Navy who, following the War of 1812, charted Georgian Bay, Lake Superior, and the North Channel. Bayfield lived to see Canada become a nation and died a Canadian citizen in 1867 in Charlottetown. So with that, I hope I'll see you next week. Pipes out.